Hi, everyone, and welcome to our new episode of Confrapar Live series. Today, we are going to talk about a fascinating topic, air mobility. I'm here with Paul Malik, CEO and founder of Flapper. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure is all mine.
Okay, I'd like to start by asking you to say a few words about Flapper.
Fantastic. Flapper is the first on-demand private aviation platform in Latin America. We operate shared flights as well as on-demand charters in countries such as Brazil, Colombia, Chile, soon also Mexico. Very positive about the sector. I think that we've proven in the last 5 years or so that there is a potential for Latin America to become sort of a leader in aerial mobility services. And overall, I'm very positive about the next year. This year has been fairly positive for us as well. And yeah, very bullish at the prospects of growing Flapper in the region.
Great. We have seen many trends, Paul, lately in aviation, and that comes to our topic today. So I guess it's not exactly urban air mobility. So would you guide us through some of these trends that we might see in the near future?
Absolutely. We've been observing sort of a convergence of what we typically perceived as mobility and what we now call aviation. And that new sort of quirky type of service or market that has been set up is called aerial mobility. And that's essentially buying services, aviation services on demand in a manner that has not been available before, with an ease similar to what we typically have experienced booking Uber. So aerial mobility is essentially going to be the next big thing in mobility and in aviation. And the big thing that we ask ourselves as sort of participants of the business aviation sector is whether business aviation is going to be a part of it, or whether companies such as Uber are going to pick it up and become the leading players in the field. So far, it seems that it's not as easy as people assumed, right? Even Uber has recently announced that they were selling their Uber Elevate, of which, by the way, Flapper was also making part. We were participating in numerous events, to another startup, right? So I think that sort of opens an opportunity for business aviation to become a part of the system. The big sort of assumption behind aerial mobility is that it's not going to be exclusively a service for wealthy customers. It will be a service which will typically replace the current market of expensive cars, and those cars being used for short haul sort of trips. So if we could replace an engine of a turboprop aircraft such as Caravan, a very reliable and very simple engine, we could potentially reduce the cost of such service by 50%. Why 50%? We talk about 40% of cost of the fuel and 10% cost of the maintenance, because electric engines or even hybrid engines are very, very cheap to maintain. We also talk about the service, which might be up to 15 times more secure or safe, right? Even though private aviation today is very safe already, especially when you consider, regulated Part 135 sector, with electric flights, this might become even safer.
So again, let's try to summarize. So you've said that we might see electrification in the industry, but you also you talk by saying shared economy. So is it both of these trends?
Exactly. It's not just about the type of aircraft that you're using, but also more and more about turning private aviation into the mainstream travel option by introducing sharing economy, right? That's something that we already do today on a limited basis. That's something that Blade does in the US. There are some companies in California that are pursuing similar model. But the big challenge still is the costs, right? It is a costly service, so you can only attend to wealthy customers, which, by the way, those wealthy customers, there will definitely be early adopters, which is great because companies like Flapper will be well positioned to become the launch platforms of such vehicles, right? But still, in the long term, the goal is to democratize the market and open it to a completely new audience, triplicate the size of the market, which we have right now.
So when you say about a platform, so do you see these platforms as the beginning of a new mode of transportation, such as eVTOLs or?
Absolutely. Companies which build entirely new markets are always given a premium in terms of valuation. So that's also one of the things we look at as our company. If we manage to reduce those costs, we're going to open up an entirely new market. And that means that the value of such service is also going to go up. Today, if you look at private aviation market in Brazil, we talk about 300,000 users. If you look at the potential of people that we call upper middle class, or in Brazilian terms, those that have a monthly salary of at least 20,000 reais, which is quite a lot on the local terms. And then they are also travelers. We talk about 2.3 million people. So that's a lot. And that's our big ambition, because today, using the existing technology and existing cost structure that we have in Brazil, we won't be able to achieve all of those objectives using, for example, Caravan-based flights or Pilatus-based flights or King Air-based shared flights.
And what about our infrastructure? Do you see that we need the number of airports or landing sites if we're talking about a urban site?
I think that we are really lucky that we are based out of where we are based out of, basically Brazil. Sao Paulo is the city with the highest number of helicopters in the world and also the highest number of helipads. So we talk about an existing infrastructure where you have the places where those vehicles might be able to land. We have 5 airports, but we also have the only helicopter control tower in the world, which means that those guys are actually already coordinating some efforts related to building dedicated control tower for eVTOL. So when you think about it, it's like layers. You have the airplanes flying, then you have the helicopters, and eVTOLs would be given a space below the helicopters, right? So that's happening. That's something that should be become a reality in the next 3 to 5 years or so. So infrastructure-wise, no, I don't see this as a problem in Latin America. I see it as a problem elsewhere, where those guys are having problems with neighbors complaining about noise, but here I think that we are actually at the right moment to introduce such technology.
It's good that you mentioned about a time frame. So you said in 3 years you might see these eVTOLs. For those who don't know, eVTOLs are electric and vertical landing and takeoff. Is that right? Takeoff and landing. Yeah.
Takeoff and landing. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are actually the Jetsons flying cars we've waited for a long time, right?
Yes, sort of.
You can say so.
Well, we can say so, but also we can't forget that this is a multi-layer market, right? It's nice to think about the passenger drone, right? Passenger drone, 5 seats, entirely new thing. Again, completely disrupting the market. But if you look at the latest survey from Corporate Jet Investor, one of the events we were actually sponsoring, up to 40% of the participants actually thought that, or said that this would only start, after 2030. Doesn't mean that there's going to be some early players, or early versions on eVTOL being in use. But yeah, until it becomes a mainstream, I think we're going to need like 5 to 10 years at least. Now, that's just one part of the game. The other part of the game is converted Caravans with hybrid or electric propulsion. And that's something easier from the point of view of the development, because you have an aircraft which has been in use for 30 years, numerous visions, refined, perfected, and the only thing you have to do is to change the propulsion and certify it with the local authorities. In Brazil, we already have a history of an electric aircraft being certified for private flights. So we don't see certification as a big issue for those, for this part of the market. And we are working on our first partnerships in terms of bringing Flapper into the game as well.
So, but you're thinking about a sub 100-mile flights. Is that right? The first one to be disrupted.
Exactly, because that's easier. That's something that is already happening. We have companies testing things in the US, in Europe, in Asia, right? So here we are looking at the timeline of, even 3 years. When you think about an entirely new clean sheet design, think about Tesla. Tesla wasn't born in 3 years, right? It took a while for those guys to build something from scratch, redefining, in a completely new manner, customer experience. So that's more difficult, right? And remember that most of those companies that are working on it, they actually don't have experience with aviation. These are startups, very ambitious ones, but yeah, it's going to take some time.
Since you mentioned startups, I guess most of these innovative companies in the sector are small and medium companies. And you mentioned Blade from New York. So Blade, I suppose, is going public through a SPAC. Would you think that this trend is going to help other companies in the sector?
Absolutely. Blade is just one example of a successful private aviation company that's going public this year through SPAC. But we also talk about other players. Surf Air announced their IPO. We've had some announcements coming from Flex Air, I believe. So, those companies that have been on the market for a few years and they prove that their business model works, absolutely. That's a very smart way to go public in a less bureaucratic way, because what matters is that people actually believe in their businesses, right? Hundreds of thousands of customers are users of those companies. They can go public financing the IPO, using just their existing customers. How the market is going to buy it is a separate thing. So I think that for those innovative products, SPAC is actually a fantastic way to go public, because you don't have to sort of convince the conservative, stock exchange players, trust funds, private equity. No, you have to convince those guys who are early adopters. So totally, I think that that's the future for next 3 years in terms of business aviation.
So you also mentioned briefly about the actually you were having troubles because of this new world. Everyone is at home, and that was supposed to affect to hit hard the aviation industry, and has hit hard the aviation industry, especially the commercial aviation. Has Flapper also been in the downturn this year?
No, so our estimate for growth this year is between 95 to 100% and 105% of growth of revenues comparing to last year. So that's very decent. I would say that was a positive year for Flapper, but also it's been a year of realization of how important it is to have access to literally any type of asset, because we work with helicopters, but we work with turboprops, private jets, large jets, group flights, cargo, repatriation flights, medical flights, right? So since we don't have fixed assets, we were able to direct the demand where the demand was during the pandemic. Now, that doesn't mean that it was a great year for the sector as a whole. We've seen ambulance companies doing particularly well because of COVID situation, especially those that have contracts with the government. But overall, if you look at the US and European market, as of November, we are around 20% below 2019 level. Is it a lot? I wouldn't say it's a lot. It's actually one of the best performing sectors within the travel vertical, right? But it's still below last year. Now, in our case, we've been very successful, but that's thanks to our complex technology and diversification of our services.
Would you say digitalization played a role as well? Because we've seen many tech companies actually getting a boost in demand because of the pandemic situation. So people need to go digital.
Absolutely, and it's still an offline business, so you need to provide to the end customer a fantastic personalized experience. But the more you can do with technology, the better. We had months this year when we were receiving 40,000 online quotes. Imagine if you were just a simple website that was processing the quotes in an absolutely unfiltered manner. You can't answer 40,000 emails in 1 month unless you have, 20 people strong team. But our technology makes it possible for the customers to see the price beforehand and then choose what they really want, knowing how much it's going to cost. So absolutely, digitization is the future. Offline is always going to be there, and those players that are well positioned and that can offer the best option, nicely positioned aircraft, decent service, they're going to be the winners in the long term.
Yeah, I have some questions arriving here. One from Wellington Oliveira, and it says about the Brazilian Midwest. So we've heard a lot of agribusiness in this pandemics, and we know that commercial aviation is not serving at least decently these farmers. Would Flapper play a role, or would any other company would play a role in that?
It's a hard question. Today we announced some flights from regions of Londrina and Maringá to the seaside resorts of Balneário Camboriú. These are some tests we are doing with our partners who fly Caravan to really test the waters. The problem we've always had with sort of commercial flights, right? Because let's not forget that Flapper serves mostly premium audiences, is that those farmers, they're actually wealthy enough to own their own aircraft. So we couldn't sort of join the groups. I think that in the long term with electrification, absolutely. In the short term, it's still relatively expensive. So we have a certain, we come to the stage when we can't really fit the price into the level that satisfies the end customer. But just to summarize, I think it's possible. And also Centro-Oeste of Brazil, the Midwest region, has been the region with the best performance during COVID in terms of business aviation flights. They are actually with the higher number of flights than in 2019. The agriculture sector is doing very well in Brazil.
Another question from Rodrigo Toledo. Did the pandemic bring any permanent change to the market?
Yes, it did. And one of the most relevant changes, and that's something also that the CEO of Airbnb highlighted before their IPO, is that there is a large outflow of people from metropolitan area. In our case, it would be Sao Paulo, Rio, Santiago de Chile, going to the city outskirts, right? Going to their resorts, going to their summer dachas, right? So places where they can effectively, do home office and run away from the COVID. And that's something that we believe is permanent, right? So less and less people going to opt for traveling and staying in large centers, urban centers. They will be looking for village type of experience, seaside type of experience, mountainous regions, and that boosts private aviation because some of those places require a helicopter to get to. So our helicopter transfers are, at historical high because that's what people need to get to places like Angra dos Reis or Paraty Laranjeiras, right? So yeah, we see it also as something positive, again, in terms of our business.
Have you seen any drop in tourist destinations, routes to tourist destinations?
Yes, one of the negative tendencies is that there's a decline in the number of wealthy foreigners coming to Latin America in a first-class flight and then taking a private jet and traveling within. Let's not forget that Brazil is a domestic market. 99% of all general aviation flights in Brazil are domestic. So if you come here, you're very unlikely to fly to, let's say, Bogota. You're actually going to do Sao Paulo, Rio. You might fly to Salvador. You might fly to Trancoso. So that's something that we see in decline. But Brazil has opened up its borders early enough, and it protected itself against the decline in travel. Because if you look at the situation in Chile, Argentina, and Colombia, which are three other markets we are also overlooking, it is way more dramatic. In Brazil, we are actually having foreign clients still. It's just that it's in decline. In those markets, it's only domestic flights. So it's a very dramatic situation for tourism sector.
Since you mentioned Latin America, we've heard that Flapper has announced a partnership with another Latin American company to explore some new routes.
Right, we have partnered with Aerocardal. They are the largest private jet operator in Chile, but also in the whole region of Pacific Latin America. So think from Ecuador to Peru. The partnership is based on developing of new lines of business. We would definitely love to be involved in services such as FBO, aircraft sales, maintenance, but also looking into new markets. If you look at the Peruvian market, for example, today there is not a single private jet operator that has jets ready to attend to customers on a daily basis. That's bad, right? And we want to change it. We want those customers that come to Peru and want to have an all-around trip to be given some options. We will be also testing some shared flights. That's mostly in Chile, and that's going to start early next year. As of today, we have some restrictions imposed by the government in Chile. So unfortunately, I can't offer a fully fledged scope of services, but also we are localizing our product to make sure that the end customer can see peso colombiano, peso chileno, and other currencies that those countries are using.
Another question: have you extended your sector only because mainly you attend business executives and wealthy tourists? So that was, I believe, the main the main customer for Flapper. What about cargo and also medical tourism? There's a question also here.
Definitely, and that was the right decision at the right time. We've always had this internal, sort of dilemma, because we didn't want to associate our brand with something like cargo or something like ambulance flights. But difficult times call for difficult measures. So we started offering those flights to some of our customers, and December was the record in terms of cargo assignments. We did have a couple of ambulance flights as well. These are on-demand requests. We are yet to evaluate the size of the market, and I think in the long term, the industry needs a SaaS-based platform that will accommodate those requests, because a lot of those deals are being done between the hospital and the company, between the government and the company, and we are still an on-demand provider, right? Which means that we don't necessarily work on a per-contract basis. But that's something that we are glad that we started. We are making some adaptations to our existing system so that in the future, the customer can see a private jet with a medical configuration or ambulance configuration, and a cargo configuration, and a VIP configuration, and perhaps a VIP, VVIP, configuration, because a jet can have different configuration, the helicopter the same. And again, there's nobody in the world doing that. So we're going to be the first platform which effectively shows you numerous type of setups for a given aircraft.
Another question, Paul. So does Flapper consider partnering with big resorts that are not served by the commercial aviation? That's a question from Lucas Miranda.
We did have a couple of partnerships already. We launched a large Boeing 737-based flight to Comandatuba, which is a city in Bahia region of Brazil that is stripped from commercial services. We do have ongoing partnerships with resorts. Some of those in the, I'm not going to tell you which ones, because of course that's confidential, but we have perhaps per week up to 30 requests coming from some of those resorts. So yeah, these partnerships, I wouldn't say they are revolutionary, but our market is complex. You can't work just with one segment. You have to search for partners everywhere. And they are good partners, and they also can offer decent accommodation to our clients. So the response is yes, and it makes part of our marketing mix.
Yeah, I've noticed you made a partnership with Ingresse, online ticketing company in Brazil. So that's aiming to these events as well.
Exactly. It's all based on the premise that Flapper wants to offer you a complete customer journey. So if you come to an event in a remote area of northeast of Brazil, and there's a private jet or a helicopter waiting for you to bring you to the end spot where the event is taking place, that's fantastic. Those people come over, they're happy, they're less stressed, they're ready to party. They're going to come back and they're going to have a good, association with both brands. So it's definitely a decent partnership. We are solving some of those problems of customer journey, and yeah, hopefully we're going to repeat it next year.
So you consider actually that all the hurdles we have with commercial aviation are helping out new entrants such as Flapper?
Yes, it might be unfair to say that, but yes, we sort of benefited ourselves from the lack of commercial flights. Many business people, many embassies, many key clients, they still need to fly for business, or they need to realize some repatriation flights. And here we are. We can always attend you, whether it's a small aircraft or it's a large commercial jet. We have it all. Whether this trend will continue, I can't say, but I will definitely tell you that in the long term, this virus or this pandemic is not going to be beneficiary for anybody. So I hope that next year with the vaccination and everything, we're going to be evolving and going back to the pre-sort of COVID economic development levels or social activity levels, and that we can focus on our business as usual.
So we have another question coming from Carlos Moreno. So people were actually concerned about safety, sanitary safety, so hygiene, less touch points. So we might see a turning point after the vaccine comes, or do you see that this is just part of the dynamics of the pandemic?
Well, I don't want to make it sort of a hospital level type of discussion, but definitely in terms of vaccination, it has to be properly executed, right? So we can't just vaccinate 20% of the population, assuming that that's going to solve our problem. We have to vaccinate at least 70%. So if the government is ready for that, then the answer is yes, it will help. It will change permanently, an aviation landscape, because even if you have passengers coming from COVID-infected areas, it's not a big issue because 70% of the population is going to be immune. Now, we have to remember that private aviation is the most, sort of COVID-free mode of transport available, because comparing to commercial aviation, which might have up to 600 touch points, private aviation has between 20 to 30. And that includes contact with people at the private jet terminal, the contact with pilots, and the contact with your driver that brings you to the hangar. And also, private jet has smaller cabin and more efficient HEPA filters, which means that the air is being changed between every 25 seconds to every 60 seconds. So the only moment you can really contract the virus is on your way to the private jet, because the moment the engines are turned on, it's virtually impossible for you to breathe the same air again, which was one of the arguments that people were actually using to promote private jets, and it did work, right? A lot of people who were afraid to fly commercial, they did use private aviation services.
Okay, moving away from pandemics, so do you see any hidden opportunity or clear opportunity in the market for Flapper to explore?
Private aviation is a complex sphere, so everybody associates it with leisure and luxury. But if you look at the whole spectrum of private aviation, only 5% of all flights globally are done for leisure. 95% of private aviation flights are what we would call essential services, which means corporate travel, embassy travel, medical flights, etc. So
I think before the pandemics, right? That was before.
That was before. Now it's going to change a little bit, but still, the point is, as an on-demand company, we're going to be arriving at some point where the market will only be limited by geographical sites, right? So we'll be expanding, but we can't sustain our company only by doing on-demand flights in the long term, right? We actually can, right? We broke even, but I'm saying, like, if you want to continue growing, you have to expand the services vertically and also horizontally. So definitely, we are looking into SaaS-based platforms. We are looking into fractional ownership. We are looking into aircraft sales. We are looking into maintenance sales, even an FBO, a typical service that you normally use when you arrive at the airport. Only in Sao Paulo Guarulhos Airport, you have 7 different companies providing you FBO services. Imagine if you could build a platform which allows you basically to contract those in a smooth manner. The pilots, they would appreciate it, definitely. So there is a market, and I think that the biggest question that we have is perhaps between choosing between shared flights and growing this very difficult part of the business, which is so difficult to optimize, and anything else that is not based on the sharing economy. My vote is we're going to be doing occasional shared flights, but we will have to wait for some technological revolution to come on the market in the form of electrical vehicles. So until this happens, we're going to be building this part, which is private aviation the way it is, but digitized.
Okay, Paul, we are reaching the end of our session. Do you want to add any remarks on the industry or on Flapper?
Well, not to self-promote ourselves, but I just think that companies like Flapper are very well positioned to be a part of this disruption. I don't see companies like Uber to sort of become the disruptors. They don't have the existing knowledge and platform and type of a client that will become an early adopter. So we are very positive about the future of Flapper, of Blade, of the likes of Surf Air, those companies that are at the forefront of private jet technology. They have the right user base, they have the right experience, and the right geographical footprint. So, well, very positive, very bullish, and hopefully, that's going to lead us to some new dimension of business aviation in the long term.
Well, again, Paul, thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for watching, and see you next time.
Thank you, I appreciate it.